Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on messaging from the Premier of BC on Ottawa's handling of our province. But first, out with the old.
Thank you for what you have built. Thank you for what you continue to represent. And thank you for continuing to inspire this country every time those aircraft take to the skies.
The federal defense minister on signaling the farewell season for the Snowbirds in the iconic Tudor jet set for retirement after more than half a century in the air. The aerobatics team will now be grounded until the arrival of replacement aircraft in the early 2030s. The Swiss-made turboprop Siskin II there. And joining us now, Laurie Hahn, a former Conservative Member of Parliament for Edmonton Centre and retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel and fighter pilot. Laurie Hahn, good to see you, sir.
Thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
Welcome back. We're hoping to discuss a few topics tonight, but let's maybe start on this one of the Snowbirds. Your thought on the decision to ground the team at the end of the current air demonstration season?
I think it's unnecessary. The aircraft is structurally capable of flying, as the engineers have stated, and the government knows this. They're ignoring it. Till at least 2030. And then they would transition to not a turboprop airplane, which is the PC-21, but a jet, which would be the new fighter lead-in trainer that we'll be buying somewhere around that time. And that will keep them in the rank of jet teams, because we would be the only G7 country with a non-jet team. The Italian French Tricolori, the British Red Arrows, the Prix de France, the Blue Angels, the Thunderbirds, and the Snowbirds have been at the forefront of the aerobatic team world. We would very much sink to a much lower level of excitement and acceptance and a much less capable symbol of Canada. I mean, the Snowbirds are one of the symbols of Canada, like the musical ride, like maple syrup. You know, Canada Day at Parliament Hill without the Snowbirds will not be nearly as nice an event. And they are the best recruiting tool that we have, not just for the RCIF, but for the Canadian Forces writ large. They are such a visible symbol of what it can be to be part of the military, and they are demonstrably the best recruiting tool we have, and we're going to lose that, and it's completely unnecessary.
Okay, so Ed, what are potential options then if it were not a prop-driven turboprop type aircraft?
The engineers who monitor the Tudor and other airplanes have said it's good structurally till about 2030. Carry on with the Snowbirds with the Tudor till 2030, and then transition the whole Snowbird team of that year to our new fighter lead-in trainer, which will be one of 3 candidates right now, all jet aircraft. Transition the whole team to that new aircraft, and then go about their standard rotation. They bring in 1 or 2 new people every year, but keep the team intact, just transition to a new airplane, and then carry on with that. And that keeps us at the forefront of aerobatic teams in the G7, keeps us as a strong recruiting tool for the Canadian Forces writ large, and that can be done.
Does it matter whether or not it's the F-35 or it's the Saab Gripen or whatever aircraft the government decides to go with?
The fighter lead-in trainer, the fighter lead-in trainer is the airplane that people will go on after they get their wings, if they're going to go on to fast, high-performance jets. Whether it's like right now, they transition to the F-18. In the future, they'll transition to the F-35, hopefully not the Gripen, but that's another story. So it's a key element in developing the Canadian Forces fighter force. And, you know, as a Snowbird airplane, it would be spectacular and doable.
Most of us know the Snowbirds are based out of Moose Jaw. However, many of the pilots, ground support crew, they come by way of Fort Wayne, Cold Lake, so there's an Alberta element there. But what kind of impact militarily does this decision have?
Well, it takes away one of the things that people in the military, pilots and ground crew, can aspire to. I mean, being a member of the Snowbirds, either in the air or on the ground, is a pretty cool thing to do, to have on your resume, so to speak. So it's something that people aspired to. I wanted to join the Snowbirds one year. My wife said no, but that's another story. But no, it's just another symbol of what Canada is, what we have been, what we have meant to the world of aviation and the world in so many other ways. It's just something to aspire to, and we're going to lose that.
We're looking at the Snowbirds now. What makes them so important, not only militarily, but in terms of Canadian identity, whether they're jets or not?
Well, you know, the Snowbirds are a symbol of Canada. They're a symbol of a modern country that is technologically advanced, that plays a serious part in the world of not just aviation, but military writ large. We're getting some of that back now after years of neglect, and that's a good thing. And the Snowbirds are a part of that. And they're looked on by other countries as, you know, we're in, you know, quote unquote, the big leagues. If we're in a PC-21, we are not in the big leagues anymore. It's a good airplane, there's no question about that. They'll put on a nice show, but you need to have jet performance to make an impact, the impact you should be able to make with Canadians and, you know, frankly, with our allies.
I want to touch on another front. Trump administration suspending the Permanent Joint Board on Defense, a cooperative board involving both nations, goes back, I understand, 86 years. You were Canadian co-chair, were you not, during your time as MP?
I was. I co-chaired it from 2012 to 2015. And it is a binational body. We don't make policy, we advise. And it started back in 1940 with Mackenzie King and Theodore Roosevelt, not Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, as a cooperative. They signed it in Ogdensburg, New York in August 1940. It's endured for 86 years as an advisory body, and there's senior folks from both countries. We operate in a classified environment. It's been a part of things going back, like the construction of the Alaska Highway, the Lend-Lease operations in World War II, the formation of NORAD, the modernization of NORAD. We advised on a lot of that. And the two co-chairs, there's one American, one Canadian. I was the Canadian side of that. And we report directly to the Prime Minister or the President. We don't go through any other bodies. It's direct from me to the PM and from the American to the President.
Okay, so what does this decision then by the Americans, what does it signify?
Well, I think it signifies, one, that they're doing policy by social media, because it didn't come from President Trump. It came from an Undersecretary of Defense, Elbridge Colby. And I think it's a bargaining tool. I mean, everything that the President does is attached to something else by way of a bargain. And I think it's just one more, it's not a big showstopper, but it's one more little thing that he can hold us up for, and things like Kuzma and various other things that we're doing binationally that are important to both countries. It's another little bargaining chip, I think. And because he does things by social media, he can also retract it by social media, and he's done that in the past. So I wouldn't get too excited about it, but it's just one more indication of the lack of trust that the President has, and the way he manipulates those things to his, frankly, largely personal benefit, but also, to the benefit of both countries. And these things do benefit both countries.
Well, we have you. I want to throw in one more quick question. Efforts building to position Edmonton, to position our province as a premier hub for defense innovation in Canada. What will it take to make that a reality?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of talent in Alberta, a lot of talent in Canada, obviously writ large, but a lot of talent in Alberta that is starting to be recognized. I mean, we're going to put a fleet of air refuelers at the Edmonton International Airport. That involves a lot of technology, a lot of infrastructure, which is, I don't know what the price tag is, but it's going to be lots of millions of dollars. Canada's involved in all levels of that, and Alberta is playing a role, which is going to expand with things like I just mentioned. There's various other projects that all are part of us reaching our, the NATO goal of now 2.5%, eventually 5%. We're going in that direction. Not fast enough for Donald Trump. That's understandable. Not fast enough for me either. We are behind the power curve, and we need to catch up. And this is part of catching up. And Alberta will play a significant role in that, because we've got all the right brains, all the right energy, and so on here in Alberta, and in a larger context in Canada. And we should and we will be part of that if people, A, will just accept it in Canada that this is important to us as a country, and get the attention of people like Donald Trump for as long as his attention span is, that look, we are in this together, and we're doing things together, and we have to be part of the future. And that's what this is about, the future of Canada as a reliable partner in not just North American defense, but worldwide defense.
Laurie Hahn, we'll have to leave it there. Good to see you, sir.
Thanks for your time. Thank you, Michael.
From the Forever Canadian petition suddenly back on the radar to BC's Premier weighing in on Ottawa's treatment of Alberta and reaction to the grounding of the Snowbirds. Time now for tonight's politics panel, and joining us this evening, Chaldean Smedza, newly retired political science faculty member with MacEwan University, and Najib Jutt, political advisor, brand strategist, who's worked on election campaigns at every level of government here and abroad. Good evening to you both, and let's begin with the leader of the opposition predicting a question about separation will appear on the referendum ballot this fall.
There is no petition, there is no referendum. The only way that there will be a referendum is if Danielle Smith makes one happen herself. And if she does do that, then the mask slips. And we know she's been a separatist this entire time.
The separatist Stay Free petition was quashed by a judge last week on the grounds First Nations were not properly consulted. It's a decision the Smith government says it will appeal, calling the ruling incorrect in law and anti-democratic. Petition organizers filed their own application with the Court of Appeal on Tuesday. Before we get to how Forever Canadian could factor into this equation, Chaldeans, if it is that, as we just heard the opposition leader suggest, that the Premier is the one to put a separation question on the referendum ballot, is it then on Danielle Smith to own, to front, to sell that question to Albertans?
Well, Michael, we have a Clarity Act, and that Clarity Act calls upon the provincial government, if they intend to have a referendum, to pose the question, and that question has to be also be approved by the House of Commons. The House of Commons has a role in the election question to make sure that it is clear. Now, Danielle Smith originally was kind of in a position of strategic ambiguity regarding this referendum question. Now she's been put in a specific bind with this court ruling. The court ruling, in my sense, is a blessing in disguise. It's asking really for the provincial government to take ownership of it and pose a question which has to be, of course, endorsed by the House of Commons. So this is a very important stage in the process. And I don't think the two referendum questions that are floating around really have the clarity that I think Albertans need. So the provincial government has to take ownership of the process and let it roll by with, of course, the consultation with the House of Commons.
Najib, the bipartisan committee of MLAs tasked with assessing what to do with Thomas Lukaszik's petition was suddenly scheduled to meet today, and we will hear from the former deputy premier tomorrow on what came of that. But what's to be made of suggestions that it will be the Forever Canadian question on the referendum ballot?
Well, it's interesting that Thomas Lukazik has become the antagonist to the separatist movement because, not only is he a conservative, but he knows how the legislative works as a former deputy premier. So they really have their hands full with him. And, I disagree with Chaldeans in the fact that I think that the right question has been put forward by Thomas, which is, do you agree that Alberta should remain in Canada? That's very clear to vote yes or no on, and it avoids all of the word smithing by their questions. Yeah, and I also agree with the opposition leader Nenshi that, the referendum that's been proposed for October, and we've talked about this before, the 9 questions, they're just, silly performative questions that are designed to prime people to vote yes on separation, holds no significance. There's no referendum question on it. Kind of a bind, and it's interesting that the separatists, keep talking about their democratic right in regards to this courting, but ignore the democratic rights of the First Nations people that it was ruled in favor of.
All right, well, talk continues to evolve in this province around the referendum and a possible question on separation. It's the impact of that talk that remains high on the radar of BC's premier.
I believe that that is part of why we are seeing the federal government engage differently with Alberta than other premiers across the country. Bluntly, we cannot have bad behavior decide who gets engaged with by the federal government.
David Eby, Tuesday ahead of meeting with the Prime Minister today, expressing frustration over last Friday's MOU update in Calgary, moving Alberta's pursuit of a new pipeline to the West Coast another step closer. The BC Premier feels steps like lowering the rise of carbon pricing in Alberta was motivated by Danielle Smith's talk of the separation movement. Najib, what does David Eby gain by railing against the federal government's handling of Alberta? How much of an argument is there to be made that BC isn't getting the same level of support?
Well, there's two arguments to be made. I mean, one is the fact that, Alberta has the highest GDP per capita in the country. So, it has that leverage, has that power, and that's how negotiation is done. You take your leverage, you take your power, and you use it to negotiate a better deal for yourself. So, I can't, Alberta is doing, and that's what it should be doing. And if BC wants to do the same thing and get a better deal on carbon tax or anything else, then it needs to leverage its power as a population base or what have you. So I don't begrudge Alberta any leverage of power that it's using and able to obtain. I do think that he's right in the sense that any conversation around separatism weakens Canada, weakens us as a trading country, weakens us in the ability to get things done intraprovincially, and then these conversations are. And it's important to recognize that the fact that these separatist conversations hurt Canada as a whole, and anyone from the separatist movements and from the UCP government that says otherwise is not being honest with the Canadian and the Alberta public.
Chaldeans, there is the saying the squeaky wheel gets the grease. But what kind of reception do you see this repeated messaging getting from the Carney government? How far might it move the needle for David Eby?
Well, Michael, I think David Eby, is playing this card for political reasons. He's in a serious trouble, in the opinion polls. And I find it interesting that the NDP government in the BC is using the same strategy that the NDP is using in Alberta. They really want to paint Danielle Smith as a separatist, and that Carney is giving in to separatism. I think that is really a misreading of the situation. Clearly, Danielle Smith has expressed that she's a pro-federalist. She wants changes to the system in Canada. But what is happening actually is that we see that the threat of separatism, that whole issue, which is on the fringes of our Alberta politics, is actually beginning to have some political leverage here. And the Prime Minister has come to the table with Danielle Smith on this memorandum. And I think BC is arguing, well, if there's a deal for Alberta, we also have issues in BC on projects that we want to push. So again, this is clear-cut politics, and BC NDP and the Alberta NDP are trying to really emphasize that Danielle Smith is really using this separatism ploy to change the system.
All right, gentlemen, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, the eventual grounding of the Snowbirds and how that plays politically. More from our panel in a moment. Welcome back. We heard from former MP and fighter pilot Lori Hahn off the top on the announcement. The Snowbirds will be standing down at the end of the 2026 flight demonstration season, awaiting the arrival of replacement aircraft at some point in the 2030s. Chaldeans, how do you see this decision by the federal government playing politically? How likely are there to be consequences from either putting the Snowbirds on pause or in how the squadron eventually moves forward with aircraft that are not jets?
Michael, I think Laurie was clear-cut in pointing out that the Snowbirds are really the expressive symbols of Canadian identity. it is part of our Canadian heritage, and the pride that it gives Canadians, I think, is a very important political consideration. Look, the government is trying to make a change here, they're grounding the Snowbirds, and I think that the plan that they have, as Laurie pointed out, is problematic. They are really making a step back, and it's also indicating that what is happening is going to have an impact on things like procurement and on recruitment. So I think that this decision politically is going to be hurting the county government, and I think that you will have to revisit it because Canadians can't tolerate years and years of this air demonstration thing being grounded. So we'll have to wait and see what happens.
Najib, surprised to see this decision coming at a time when there is so much discussion around the sovereignty of the nation, the threat from south of the border. Is there not a role in that regard for something as iconic as the Snowbirds?
Well, I think that people need to understand that as much as I agree with Laurie Hahn on, the symbolism and the tradition of the Snowbirds, that, to meet 2% NATO spending, 2% of GDP, cuts have to happen, and they're saving money everywhere they can to meet that, and which Canada now meets, as do all NATO members now meet their 2% obligation. But I mean, really the question is, why? Why do we need to meet that 2% obligation? Why do we need to increase it to 2.5% or 5%? It becomes like one of these endless pits of spending. Defense always does. And also, my question would be, defense from whom? Why does Canada even need to keep spending so much money on defense? Other non-NATO nations don't. Austria, Switzerland, Ireland don't spend anywhere near 2% because they don't consider themselves to be countries that are, under threat. I mean, the only country where Canada's under threat from is our neighbor. The only honest thing that Trump has done is rename it as Department of War, because that really is what it is, right? It's war spending. When you're the aggressor, it's war spending. It's not defense spending.
Chaldeans, on another point, how worrisome is this element of the Trump administration signaling suspension of the Permanent Joint Board on Defense?
Michael, it is worrisome. I think the Permanent Joint Board on Defense is an element of strategic collaboration between the two countries on defense. And Mr. Trump is signaling here his displeasure with Canada. He's actually stopped using tweets and abusing Canada. But I think he's using this kind of symbolic indications of displeasure with Canada. So this is an example of a real deterioration in the relationship and the lack of trust between the two leaders. We're also going to be seeing an impact of this also on CUSMA. So yeah, Michael, this really is a low point in the relationship, and this defense board decision is really reflecting that kind of situation that exists between the two countries.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there for time. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News about the federal government retiring the iconic Snowbirds after 50 years. Terry writes, and after more than 50 years, the government decides to move Canada into the future by replacing the Snowbird Tudor jet with a prop plane. What a joke. Tony's also not happy about it. A great shame when you have some of the best. Mark thinks Ottawa could have done better, saying the Canadian government had years to procure a de Havilland or Bombardier military trainer for our military. Instead, they chose to look the other way and support another country's economy. Robert chimes in with a question. Why aren't they being replaced with CF-18s? We should have about 100 of those. And Ralph believes the Snowbirds don't need to be replaced at all. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, with a committee of MLAs conducting last-minute meetings on what to do with the Forever Canadian petition, we'll hear from campaign founder Thomas Lukazik on the outcome Thursday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone. From all of us at Alberta Primetime, thank you for watching, and join us again next time.